So the title of my talk today is Faith, Too Big to Fail. So I ask you this question. How you doing on that? Is your faith too big to fail, or are there times when you really sort of teeter on the brink and the edge and say, wow, I think despair is overtaking me. I think panic is filling my heart. I think it's I'm starting to believe in the negativity that surrounds me in the world. It can happen to any of us at any time. The question is, well, what are you going to do about it? What have you done about it, and what will you do about it in the future? You know, faith is defined in many ways by many people. Some people just think that faith and hope are synonymous, interchangeable, that one is just the same as the other. I disagree with that. I don't think faith and hope are the same, and neither did the Apostle Paul. As a matter of fact, in his definition of faith, he uses the word hope. He says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I love that last phrase. The assurance of things hoped for. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. So you can hope for something, and there's still a scintilla of doubt in there, just a little bit, just a little ray of darkness in that. I hope this happens, not sure, but I hope it happens. Faith is the assurance of that which you have been hoping for. It wipes out any doubt whatsoever. But the evidence of things not seen. Wow. I like that phrase, the evidence of things not seen. There are many that would say to us, what does that mean? The evidence of things not seen. I think we have to look at that this way. We have to look at something in a way that we have not looked at it before. That's the evidence of things not seen. It's evident on the surface that something else is afoot, is going on. And yet we have not seen it yet. It hasn't manifested. Charles Fillmore defined faith this way, a little bit differently. He said faith is the perceiving power of the mind linked with the power to shape substance. The perceiving power of the mind. That means that somehow, somewhere, someplace, somebody in their mind saw a chair. They saw it in whatever way they perceived it. They use this perceiving power of the mind to be able to see more than just a rock that they've been sitting on for years. They saw this ability to put things together in their mind first. Then they use this ability to shape substance into that which later became a chair. And chairs have evolved over the years from whatever they started as into what we now see, all these different kinds of chairs. Now, it's more than just a chair, of course. Anything that we see in the present moment started as a power that had been perceived, or a thought and an image in someone's mind. How did they get that thought into their mind? How did this happen? Well, as a songwriter, I know this. People ask me sometimes, they'll say, how did you go about writing this particular song you wrote? And I have to tell them truthfully, I don't know how. I just sort of allowed myself to let go, and the words just poured in, and everything fit in the right place, and it worked. It worked out. Some ideas that I had would seem to be beyond that which I had had before. I didn't realize my imagination held the way of saying a certain phrase that I'm now using. It's not just that I borrowed phrases and words from other people all over the place. Of course I did, but somehow I was able to put them together in a certain way. Each one of you do this too. You have that moment of inspiration. Frank did a talk called Inspiration, and he spoke on that very idea that something happens within us that changes the way that we had been thinking and transforms it into something new. You know, the Apostle Paul also says something else that's very, very important to each one of us. He's talking to the flock that he had in one of the churches of his time, but it passes on through the millennia to us today, and it means exactly the same thing. He said to them, "Be not conformed by the world, but rather be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And that's where faith comes in. This perceiving power of the mind linked with the ability to shape substance. What is substance? Substance is defined as the underlying qualities of all things before they are manifest. And then the perceiving power of the mind and the ability to shape them brings them into reality. Now, we might say to ourselves, okay, let's go back to that chair example for a moment. All around the person who invented the chair were pieces of wood, let's say. Pieces of wood. They were just lying there all around. They grew up as trees. A tree limb fell off, or somebody chopped down the tree and it fell, and so forth. And the tree was split up, and there lay all this potential chair just lying there on the ground. Someone had this perceiving power within their mind and said, that's part of my chair that I'm going to design and create and build. And they took it and they fashioned it into a seat. And then they decided I needed to rise up off the ground. I need some legs. The legs are a little flimsy. I need to have some braces to hold those legs together. More wood, more shaping, more shaping. Okay, now that's great, but I'm leaning backwards and almost falling off. This isn't a chair, this is a stool. A new word created there all of a sudden. So it's just a chair, it's just a stool. I need to put a back on it. How am I going to? And the perceiving power of the mind sees in advance the back for the chair and then finds the materials, the substance to shape them into this. And everything on earth works that way. Take the very idea we have of our great Silicon Valley explosion that happened a few decades ago. Before that, it was just a bunch of sand someplace. But the silica was used and experimented on, and it was discovered that electricity passes through it one way, but not the other. And if you layer them and put them in certain order, you can create all these different systems and stack them up and make a solid state instrument that carries electrical impulses, which then can be changed in certain ways and transmitted in certain ways. That knowledge, data, is transmitted through them, and information, the information era that we know today, was born. You know, there was a time in the 1800s when one of the people who worked in the U.S. Patent Office put forth a suggestion that the patent office ought to be closed because everything that could be invented had been invented. That's a true story. That was the image that this person saw. There are people today that say when oil finally is depleted from the face of the earth, there will be no way to power anything because of their view that oil is the only way to produce things. But something always comes along because the perceiving power of the mind never stops. It never stops. And also the ability to shape substance never stops. These inspirations that occur within, that are sent from some, it seems like an outer source, come into these people and they get it, a new idea. And this idea then is transformed into something solid, and the rest works out into a way that is helpful for all of us. This is where faith comes in. This perceiving power of the mind, linked with the ability to shape substance, In other words, shape nothingness or shape something that is inert and is just lying there in potential. You can shape it and turn it into something concrete that we can use. It happens in every level of our consciousness. The same thing happens within our own consciousness. We think that we are static, that everything that has been created in us, our personality self, that's as far as it's going to go. This is the way I think, this is the way I am, this is the way I have always been, my family is like this, it goes on and on. My world is like this, nothing is going to change. And then it does. And we're amazed. Why are we amazed? That's the very nature of life itself, to constantly expand and evolve. Constantly expanding and evolving. What is it Jesus says about faith? If you have faith the size of a grain of mustard seed, that's really small, and you plant that, it will grow into a huge, huge bush from which birds can land, feed. Life goes on and flourishes and expands. If you have faith that small. You know, there's an example in the Bible, whether the story is true or not, really makes no difference. They were trying to show a point. And that is where Jesus is seen walking on the water. And Peter, his disciple, calls out to him and says, I'm going to walk out to you. And he does, and he begins walking. And as he's walking to him, he starts looking around and seeing the size of the waves all around him. And he begins to doubt. And as he doubts, he begins to sink. And he cries out, save me, save me. And Jesus grabs his hand and pulls him up and says to him, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? It was that grain of doubt, that scintilla of doubt that changed from faith to hope. And then the hope changed to despair, and he sank. That's an example. That's a story to show us what happens in our own lives. When we look into the outer and we see the waves around us, and we become fearful and doubtful, and as we do, we begin to sink. And we can become overwhelmed by any number of things. Why, we can be overwhelmed by an election. We can be overwhelmed by someone being inaugurated. We can be overwhelmed by any sort of thing. We can be overwhelmed by an illness that occurs within us or within a family. We can be overwhelmed by a situation where we suddenly have that situation where some of the finances that we had been counting on are no longer present because we had to use them for something else. But there's always that card that says, bank error in your favor. Pass, go, and collect $200. It really works out that way. Life works out that way. It's a pretty wonderful thing, actually. To be able to look at life and still retain faith. Knowing that that is the thing that keeps us on a steady path. Now think about this for a moment. You're watching television and you're watching a show that suddenly has something very gruesome on it that you just don't want to watch anymore. You can do one of two things. You can change the channel. Well, three things. You can change the channel, you can turn it off, or you can just stand glued to the television and watch it anyway. If you turn it off, or you change the channel, when you come back to it, a little bit in your mind says, oh yeah, that's just a program. There's people on the other side with cameras rolling. There's a man sitting in a director's chair, or a woman sitting in a director's chair. And when the scene is done, say, cut! And that's the end of that scene. If we put it on perspective, then we are no longer suspending reality. We are in the flow of reality once again. But sometimes it takes us backing away from that to remember that it's just a happening. It's just a creation. That's all it is. It's a figment of someone else's imagination that we have temporarily gotten caught up in. You know, there are some who believe that this entire universe around us works like a hologram, that it's actually not happening, that there's really only one presence and one power, and that is what is real. When we get ourselves back into that space, then we can get away from this suspension of reality that has gotten us hung up into. That's where prayer and meditation come in to strengthen our faith. That's where using prayer and meditation, we either change the channel, that's what I would call prayer. We're still alert, but we change the channel when we're into something else. Or we turn it off and we become still. And we close our eyes and we breathe. We close our eyes and we breathe. Now, yes, we have to go back into the world, but we're no longer a part of it the way we once were. We are in the world, but not of it, as Paul says. You know, I didn't used to like Paul, and more I read him from a different standpoint, the more I like where his mind was and how it evolved over the years. It evolved in a sense of love. And the same thing can happen for each one of us if we stay in that place of love. And we can't do it by allowing our attention to be focused on the outer or on those waves all around us that bring us down. We can get to the point where we no longer see that. We don't doubt, and we stay focused on the truth of our being. Here. We get here by turning off the TV, by turning off the knowledge and the information that's coming from the outer, by listening to the still small voice within, which changes everything for us. And then our faith begins to grow. It grows and it grows and it grows, just like the mustard seed. It grows to the point that it no longer fails. We know where to turn. We have been there before, where it's so common for us and so knowledgeable for us, and we have so much faith in faith that we know where to go. We know where to turn. And we do. We turn without thinking. We don't have to remember for ourselves, oh yeah, prayer and meditation. Oh yeah, let me try that again. It's just, it becomes a part of us, like riding a bicycle, and we never forget it, and we go right back to it. It becomes too big for anything to cause us to fail. Faith, too big to fail. Something grander than anything we could ever imagine. We get to the place where this young boy was once. He's playing on a playground, and a man comes up and sits beside him as he's watching a baseball game. And they watch this game, and the other team is just hitting the ball, and his guys can't catch it, and so forth. And he finally asks the little boy, "What's the score?" The little boy says, 65 to nothing. He says, 65 to nothing? Why don't you just quit? You can't possibly. That's not a game anymore. 65 to nothing. Aren't you ready to go home? He says, we haven't been up to bat yet. And that's sort of the way we have to have in our own selves. Yeah, it may look like it's a total disaster around us, but we haven't been to bat yet. We haven't worked yet. We haven't really used that which is within us, that innate power, to perceive with our minds and create from nothingness, what appears to be nothingness, something that will actually bring us happiness, joy, contentment, and a sense of calm, peace, and return us once again to who we truly are. We are the individualized expression, each one of us, of one presence and one power. We're only individualized expressions of that. Just like each wave cap is the individualized expression of a great, vast ocean. Remember the ocean. Walk upon it. Don't doubt. Have that faith. Have that assurance of all that is hoped for. And the evidence that is not seen will start appearing before you.